a rehabilitation specialist for a whole lot of years. And for 34 of those years, I've been studying and helping people with chronic pain. I'm a specialist in mind-body pain and TMS. And we are here at TMS Roundtable live. I'm speaking from Israel. It's evening. And my co-host, I'll introduce in a minute, is speaking from Australia. It's morning. And our two guests are from the East Coast in America, North Carolina and New York. And we want to hear from you. We want to hear what's on your mind. We want to hear what you're thinking. We want to hear what's in your heart. And we want to help. So hope to stay with us. Rose?
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us again. You know, I want to reflect for a few moments on how hard it is for many of us. And, you know, things like fibromyalgia and that has now come up and it's become worse because we're at home and we're interacting with people we love, but also people that annoy us. So we send our condolences to those who have lost loved ones or who are ill at the moment, because their personal pain is also exacerbated. My name is Rose Hoey. I practice intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy, a modality that focuses on revealing the repressed and neglected feelings hidden in the unconscious. The work releases us from pain experienced in our original attachment bonds. One of the ways we can get in touch with those early feelings, or all our feelings, is through the arts. And we are so lucky today to have Gayle Kirschenbaum, a forgiveness coach, filmmaker, photographer, and Michael Galinsky, filmmaker, photographer, and passionate about helping people heal from chronic pain. He has given us so much time over the weeks, and hopefully he'll help you travel through your own experience of pain and how you can get out the other side. As you enjoy what they have to say, I'm reading this, by the way, and hear a little of their journey, reflect on your own journey. Is it possible for me too, or for you too, to turn around the chronic anxiety and pain in your body to be the source of strength, healing, and peace in your own life? I hand you over now to Gayle. Thank you. Oh, hold on a moment. I'm not eating my own medicine at the moment. I'd like us all to take a few moments to relax our shoulders, notice your body, notice if you're tight, notice where you're tight. Your jaws, your hips. Let your body rest. Let it rest deeply as you listen to our two guests. Breathe in a deep breath, in and out, to release some of your tension. We'll also do a short breathing exercises after our Q&A. Thank you. Thank you, Gayle. I'd like to introduce Gayle, a beautiful filmmaker from New York City. And she's a forgiveness coach now after her experience. And Gayle, would you mention also the two people who influenced you in making this film? Eva, I can't remember her name. I didn't write it down. But I think you know who I mean.
Oh, yeah. Well, they actually, I learned about them afterwards. Eva Kor, who's a Holocaust survivor. But I'll tell you the story. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me on here. Rose, I think you found me from my TED Talk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is called No More Drama with Mama. So here, I just will speak briefly about my story and why I'm here and why, as John Lennon line, life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans. My life took an unexpected turn. So I've been a creative my whole life, and I, like many of us, came from a traumatic childhood and suffered a lot of abuse I think starting from the minute my mother found out she was having Gayle and not Gary. Narcissistic women tend to do better with sons and daughters. So being born a very, very sensitive person into this world was very challenging. And I ended up, oh, I see we lost Tova. Is she coming back? Okay, sorry. So I ended up.
Sorry for that.
That's all right. I know. I was like, oh my God, anything I said?
No, this is Israel, and there's angels. And sometimes
okay.
they'll come flying through, and
Oh.
they'll bump into an internet cable.
Oh, I see.
So,
It's
yeah.
a little touchy.
Forgive me.
Okay.
Forgive me.
All right.
We're back.
Not that I'm insecure. I don't want to take it personally. Okay. So I was in the midst of just saying my own personal journey and why I'm here today. So I ended up, it was not a good childhood. You can learn about it by watching my film, Look at Us Now, Mother, which was on Netflix and now it's on Amazon, which is about my journey to forgive my mother. And in my TED Talk, I talk about it and my steps to finding forgiveness. So when I left home early and I went to college young, and I built a career and I was having, wonderful success in the creative field, and I became a TV producer, a filmmaker. But every time I went home, so here I am, I'm on national news, articles in New York Times, live TV shows, and I go home and I revert to the same situation. I'm the victim, I'm being scapegoated, I'm dreading every minute of it. And it wasn't just my mother, because she trained my brothers when I was young to be her bouncers and bully me. And of course they were raised that way, so they continued that through adult life and got passed on to the next generation. And so I was steaming with anger and rage underneath this all. And it was having a tremendous effect on me. And I just have to say, when I was growing up, because we're talking about here the mind-body connection, because I lived in so much fear of my mother. I didn't know what she was going to do. I didn't know what would trigger her, because I didn't do anything and she'd be filled with rage and attack me emotionally, physically. And so I lived with headaches all the time and nausea and throwing up and dizzy spells. And I remember in 7th grade on the way to Hebrew school in a carpool, I said to one of the kids in the carpool, I have a headache. And she said, what's that? And I thought everybody had them. Anyway, I did leave home young. I was advised by a social worker. I was a teenager when I went to university, and the headache stopped. But as I said, I built this career. I was having a lot of success in it and being acknowledged and winning awards and blah, 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 blah. But I had 2 lives. I had that life, and then I had this life when I went home. And by the time I hit 50, still single, I realized it was affecting everything. It was affecting all my relationships. And I made a funny movie then called My Nose, about my mother trying to get me to have a nose job, because yes, she always wanted me to have a nose job, and no, I did not have a nose job. But as a baby boomer in the time and place I grew up on Long Island, New York, having a nose job was a rite of passage for women. And so I made a funny movie called My Nose about her trying to get me to have a nose job. And this little short homemade film had a huge, huge response. And that's when I realized, oh my God, everybody has pain. Because they would stand online when I got off the stage to tell me their story. And it didn't have to be about a nose. A woman opens up her coat to show me her weight issues, attributing it to her long deceased mother. And that's when I realized I have to help people, and I have to go on a journey in front of the camera with my mother to resolve our relationship. And so how many mothers would do that? So I had an inkling she might say yes, because when My Nose opened up in Washington, D.C., it was at a film festival. We ended up on the cover of the Washington Post style section. And one thing she said, and this goes back a long time, so your older listeners will know, the buffalo nickel had the Indian on the other side. And she always said that my nose looked like the Indian on the buffalo nickel. So, and she has a point. And so it was out of the movie. They had my profile, which it was an image from the film against the profile of the Indian. Really big picture in the paper. And then the journalist's first line into the article was, if you have a mother like Gayle Kirschenbaum, you better get yourself in psychoanalysis. So mom reads it, right? And you're all probably wondering, oh my God, did that devastate your mother? Not my mother. She said, great, bad press is better than no press, I'm on the cover of the Washington Post. In true narcissistic style, it's better to have attention in any way. So when I went to her and I said, Mom, would you do this with me? And she said yes, which, as I said, I wasn't surprised based on her reaction. I knew I had a gold mine because, one, I have a huge archive that I inherited because I was born in the 50s and my dad started shooting 8mm footage. I knew I'm going to have to go back and tell their stories. I knew I had his World War II book. And I knew that my mom today is very funny. She's kind of the Howard Stern of her generation. She's been called the geriatric shock jock. She's into shocking people. And so I knew she'd be entertaining. And 3, I am a filmmaker and a storyteller, and I'm pretty open, so I had everything I needed. What I didn't realize when I set out to make it is what it was going to do to me. And I want to share this with you because this ties into what we're talking about today. I was trying to figure out, how am I going to tell the story and not sound like a victim? Who cares about an adult complaining about their childhood? And I remembered my whole life I journaled, I kept diaries. And so after 3 months of searching, I found that box. And because I was always an artist, they had a lot of drawings. One looked like Edward Monk's Scream, and there was a lot of dark stuff there. So I sat down and I read them. And when I read them, I relived the trauma. And that affected me emotionally. Now, I didn't make this connection, but I started, my hands started drying up, my fingers. And of course, I ran to the doctors. They said it was psoriasis. First it was eczema, then it was psoriasis. They put me on prednisone. Then they're giving me topicals. Then I'm getting laser treatment. And I'm here in New York, so I'm going to the top, dermatologist. And it wasn't helping, and it was really bad because we use our hands for everything. It was thick with plaque and bleeding and split and bleeding that I had to wear vinyl gloves all the time. So I run down to Chinatown. I find a Chinese herbalist, and he tries to help me, and it doesn't. And now I'm 4 years into this, and I was now known for my hands. Literally, I'd answer the phone, and they'd go, oh, Gayle, how are your hands? And I have friends all over the world and friends who travel, and they'd be saying, I've got the magic cream. And literally, I was getting cream and all kinds of potions shipped to me, saying, I have your answer, and nothing helped. And then what happened was I wrote to my chiropractor / acupuncture. When I say it had been 15 years since I saw him because he was in Los Angeles and I was already back in New York. And I sent him the pictures of my hands. And I said, can you help me? And he said, you need love. And I said, yeah, well, I'm alone now. He goes, well, what about your dog? I said, she died. And then he goes, you have to trick yourself. As soon as he said I had to trick myself, I knew it. I knew it was the mind-body connection. I knew it wasn't anything they were saying. Call it psoriasis, call it anything you want. I knew that I created it from my emotions. And I actually had no fingerprints. I had to go get a passport, and I had no fingerprints. And I kept thinking, if and when I'm with another person, a lover, I won't be able to touch them. So I ended up putting a program together. I spoke to an energy healer, and I learned things. I learned how to do EFT, emotional freedom technique, tapping. I learned Qigong. I found a Qigong master that I just listened to his tape and meditated. And really, in not that much time, it would be like pieces of skin would start coming through. And I think, okay, it's going to go back again, because the prednisone would release a little good skin, and then it would after the week of taking it, it would just come back to this thick stuff. And then eventually my hands came back, and it was remarkable, and it was empowering, because I have always believed in mind, body, spirit, but I was now living proof that I got myself sick due to an emotion, due to the terrific trauma, and that I was able to heal myself. So anyway, the film came out, and I was very humbled. I premiered in Israel at the Doc Aviv, and then on Cinematex and Channel 8. And then I traveled the world with it, and I was shocked by the reaction of it, where people literally grabbed me and said, you have to help people. Like, this is your job. And that led to the TED Talk, and now it is my life's mission. So I have a method of teaching forgiveness, because I'm a firm believer that if we don't release that anger and the resentment we're holding on to, that's going to eat away. That makes us sick. That becomes illness, cancer, whatever you call it, in us. So I teach the method that I organically did myself. And it's the three main steps are understand, reframe, and then forgive. And it's not condoning. There's a lot of energy in the word forgiveness, and you're not condoning, you're not forgetting. You do it for yourself. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the biggest gift I can give we can give ourselves. So I'm going to just end it because I've spoken a long time, to say that we can all have success, what people consider success, the money, the career, the family, the cars. That doesn't mean we're going to be happy. If we don't learn to forgive, that's how we're going to be happy and healthy. So sorry I went on so long, but that's
beautiful.
And then I'm doing a workshop this Saturday that I just wanted to get out there, a virtual workshop. So I do it so I can reach, because people contact me from all over. So that's about it.
Excellent.
Do you think, Tova, that you would, sorry, Tova, Gayle, do you think that you'd sort of give some idea maybe on the internet afterwards how they can contact you if they want to?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm just
Yeah.
going to say, and yeah, I'll post it wherever.
Good.
Yes. I mean, my website's my name, GayleKirschenbaum.com, but I'll leave the link to the event, and it's Eastern time, 10 to 4 p.m. And we do lots of breaks along the way, and I keep it small. It's a very small group. So we use Zoom, and we could, and I partner people. So we have breakout sessions. So it's very intimate, and we do a deep dive. And then I'm offering support there afterwards, Zoom coaching afterwards. And it's at a huge bargain now because, COVID, and I just want to help as many people as I can help. So yes, I'll give you all that info later.
Thanks, Gayle. Michael, could you tell us about all the rage and your passion?
I'm going to actually make a more direct connection to what you were just saying, Gayle, which is, I had, like you, I'm Jewish, and I grew up with crazy Jewish parents who were born during the Depression, who had this constant sense of lack, but who also had kind of some of the similar issues. Like my mother had a mother who wasn't very nice to her, but she had grown up with an awful stepmother, and so she didn't know how to be a mother. So she didn't know how to mother her child, and her child didn't really know how to be a mother. And but she was a very successful social worker. So there was a kind of a weird contradiction in my family where my father was a psychologist, my mother was a social worker, and they were absolutely incompetent as parents. So, it just made me really distrustful of all kinds of systems. Like, you're a psychologist, get out of here, And so my dad had some of the issues. So my mom was actually really overwhelmingly supportive, to the degree that you didn't really believe it. Like, everything you drew was great. Okay, but my dad was very critical. So nothing you drew was even worth paying attention to. So, you're like, you don't know what to believe in, except it's kind of undermining, right? But I ended up, because of kind of this resistance to systems, I ended up being a religious studies major, largely because I was kind of drawn to all these different classes, which were kind of about systems and how we use them, but also constantly questioning them, And so it was like time to declare major. I was done. And then after college, I was having a lot of problems with my dad, because every time I would talk to him, the last thing he would say on the phone to me, and I would beg him not to do this. I said, Dad, I know you're going to do it right when you get work. Because he didn't think I was like, please just stop. But he couldn't help it, And it was so undermining. But at a certain point, I kind of came to see, oh, you know what? In our life, especially like in my parents' generation, where they were both academics coming up in an era, I mean, they were kids during the Holocaust, right? And so my dad his parents came over in 1908 from Lithuania. And so only recently did I look it up, and I was like, oh, 1908, that was the end of the pogrom. So they came over in a whole era of pogroms. And then there was the Countess pogrom, which happened in like 1941. The Germans marched into Lithuania, and they handed out pickaxes and said, kill your neighbors. So the Germans didn't even have to do it. All their neighbors killed all the Jews, and that was it. 230,000. And I'm just thinking, okay, they're getting that information. So I'm kind of going forward and backwards, but the idea being that there was this great deal of trauma that was never dealt with. And so my dad was completely anti-religion, very culturally Jewish, but we never even did a Seder, not once when I was growing up. I mean, it was just nothing. And that's part of the reason also I ended up as a religious studies major, because I was interested in these ideas of ritual. So the point I'm making is, when I was about 30, I asked my dad, can we write a book together called Transitions? Like, let's work on, and it goes to exactly what you're saying. You go away to college and you change. They don't see you change. They don't observe you change. And they say, be who you were. And you're like, I don't want to be who I am. Be who you were because it's uncomfortable for me to see you change. And so there's all this resistance to change that takes place. So I was like, hey, Dad, since you know about ritual and you know about science, why don't we write like a pop culture book together where we try and do kind of what you did, is work through some of these things. We made some progress, but as Erickson wrote in the 7 Stages, I was like, no, I was like, it's too formal. That's not what it is. And so we weren't able to ever do it. But doing that actually helped us to cross through some level of ritual and have more respect for each other, even though he couldn't let go of it, the power. But anyway, so there's all these deep connections in how we grow up. And if we don't examine those connections, and we actually don't partner with the adults to help create those transitions. And that goes back to ritual. Ritual is very powerful. That's why we had these rituals. They are transformations. If you go to a communion or you have a bar mitzvah, I mean, you literally become an adult. And so in the ideas of the community, in the eyes of the community, you're now an adult and you're going to be treated as one to some degree until ritual starts to fall apart. And then all of it has no meaning. And all it is you just get a watch. You know? So anyway, that's it. But I wanted to reflect that because there's all these different threads, even though our movies are very, very different in some ways, they're also very similar.
So I'm interested. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm about you, Michael. So I just want to let everybody know that until Rose found me, I never heard of Dr. Sarno. I'd never heard of TMS. I never knew any of this. And I watched Michael's wonderful film, and I'm in the midst of finishing Sarno's book about the back. So I'm curious to know, because in watching the film, of course, we see you suffering with back pain. And did your father also have the pain?
Yeah. So in the movie, part of the way we even came to it is he had terrible back pain. Well, first he almost died of an ulcer, and then he got whiplash. And that was when I was in 2nd grade. And then after years, someone gave him Dr. Sarno's book. And as a psychologist, it made total sense. And he immediately got better. And like I said, he had that lack mentality. So he was very cheap. We were never allowed to get a soda in a restaurant when I was like,
oh, me too. Oh, my God. I have to tell you, I can't believe you just said that. Because, we would go out like Jews for Chinese food. And I remember looking at the people at the table next to us, and they'd be, the kids would be getting Cokes. And I'm like, they must be really rich. I was for anyone who was kids, they were able to have a Coke. These are rich people. Yeah, we never did. Yeah, we were very frugal.
So I don't think it was just the depression. I think it was just it was, generations of struggle. But he was never able to let go of that like he would. Yeah. So that was something that it carries on as well. And it's something that's hard to overcome. But it was. So he had this terrible back pain, and so what I was saying, he was very cheap, but he bought a carton of books and he gave it to everybody who ever had back pain. And he was very much a proselytizer, so it was always in my life. And I don't think I paid much attention, except I knew who he was. Then when my brother was in graduate school and couldn't drive or type because he had RSI in his hands, my dad insisted that he go see Dr. Sarno because he was going to get surgery on his wrist. And my dad was like, if you get surgery without going to see Dr. Sarno, I won't talk to you again. And so my brother went, and 3 weeks later he was better. And that's how I came to know about him, because I read the book then. And my back would go out once or twice a year and nothing for 10 years until life catches up with you.
So, it was so wonderful for me to learn about Sarno through your film, his book, because in my own family, my father always was riddled with pain in his back. He was always getting those cortisone injections, his neck. I have memories of my father in traction. I have memories of him with his sciatica, and he couldn't drive. And then my brother, who's not with us anymore, he died in September. He, as early as I can remember, I just asked my mother yesterday because of, my learning about this. When did Erwin start getting his back problems? And she said, when he was a waiter in the Catskills. So I guess he was in college then. But it's what got him out of the Vietnam War, because he was being inducted and he went to see a specialist. And then he had like 2 back surgeries in his adult life. And then life took a turn, even for the worse, when he didn't know why he didn't feel well for a year. It wasn't getting diagnosed. He ran for every test, stress test, you name it. And then the pain in his back, and he had a high threshold for pain. He was living with it for most of his life. He went to a pain management doctor who must have given him an MRI, and they saw his spine was fractured from tumors he didn't even know he had, and it ended up being cancer. The source was his lung, and it was all over. And he went through horrific 3 years. And when I think about him and his character, I could never, before I knew about Sarno, I always was mind, body, spirit, and I could never talk to him about it. And he shut me up, and I just think about their character of keeping everything in. I remember, look, I'm sensitive like you are. We're artists, you know, we want to know, we dig into our past, we make films about it, we put ourselves out there. But my brother was a lawyer. He was very worried about the film, about people knowing he was from a dysfunctional family. That was a whole other thing. And like, right, who isn't?
Right. I was going to say, it's just
exactly right.
That's like, the definition of family. It's
right, and very private and very secretive, and so it was very challenging. And I remember a few months, I kept trying to open it up. You know, like, hey, I know about my childhood. I mean, the whole world knows about my childhood. Like, you're 8 years older. Like, what happened for you? And he would just be dismissive. Everything's fine. Like, and I just couldn't get through. And I found it so interesting as I'm reading Sarno's book, where he talked about people who get this are highly, generalizing, highly accomplished, very driven, perfectionists. And my brother had all these. He was the firstborn. That sense of having to be the anchor of the family, the sense of responsibility. But yes, so for me, I can only emphasize what set me free emotionally, because I was, other than the hand breakout, the skin thing, I'm very lucky, because as soon as I left home, the headaches were gone. I don't live with pain. I don't have pain, and let's just say I just got Medicare this year, so you know how old I am. So I feel very grateful, but I just lost my train of thought. Where was I going?
Forgiveness. You're grateful for forgiveness.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. God, nothing without you, Michael, and we just met. So I'm so grateful. Well, this is what I say. I say the obstacles that come into our life are opportunities for us to grow. And I say that if I didn't have, can you say the F word here or no?
Absolutely.
Well, you could. If I didn't have that fucked up childhood, okay, I would have never learned how to forgive, because I wouldn't felt that need, you know? And I learned it because I had to, or I was going to die emotionally. And I learned how to do it. And now the crazy thing is I'm teaching and I'm helping other people. And it's funny, because when I get up and speak and I realize the impact and how people are listening and learning, because I'm giving people a method. That's the other thing. People go, forgive, but nobody tells. I was just watching another TED Talk before I got on, but nobody tells you how to do it. So I'm giving people a method. It's the one that I've used, and I think it's effective, and it seems to be helping other people. But yes, so we're now dealing, it's COVID time, right? We're in sheltering in place. As you were saying, Rose, some of us are home with people we don't particularly get along with. I'm alone, and I'm having a new love affair with myself. I just wrote an essay called, my new love story. It's my new self, because I've learned things about myself in my home I didn't know, and I wouldn't have had I not been here, had to be here rather. So it's an opportunity now for all of us to take, it's like a full stop. We were given a full stop. It's like reset, it's reset. We need to learn. And as I said, I know, as you were talking about, there's a lot of people at home. You have kids who are traumatized by trying to do the career, training, educating the children, or having a spouse, partner, roommate who you never really got along with, and now it's even worse. So my mission is to teach people how to flip those relationships around, because when I teach forgiveness, these are tools that you can use in any relationship. Yeah. So when I forgave my mother, you better believe I had to forgive my brothers. And then anytime we meet people who are difficult in our lives, how do we deal with it? And then we are difficult. And think about it. When we're difficult, when we're not being kind to others, That's because we're not feeling the love. So love is the most powerful emotion. And so why are we not being kind? What is triggering us?
So you make me think of two things I really wanted to say. It's like our movie is called All the Rage, and it's partly like a double entendre because, it's all the rage. Pain is all the rage. It's like everyone's got it. But the original working title was The Story of Pain, which unfortunately is a little bit negative, but it's because everybody's pain has a story.
Right.
And so when you really start to think about things in terms of stories, like what's your story? It's something you were saying earlier. And sometimes our story is, I'm really mad because my mom was a jerk, right? Like that's your story, and it defines every aspect of every act and every scene in your life. But if you can rewrite your story where it's like, and part of the way to rewrite your story, and it's kind of like you can't really forgive people until you can kind of understand yourself. And they're kind of double tracks that are going along the same way. And you make a little progress up each one, but until you can kind of fully understand or begin to understand who you are, it's harder to understand other people. And so one thing I think is really important is really empathy. And empathy doesn't mean feeling sorry for somebody. It's really taking their perspective. And so when, with your mom, for instance, you can understand, God, her mom was probably really controlling. And oh my God, she was brilliant, but she had no outlet. God, that must have been so frustrating. And if she'd been taught that this is what she needed to do for you to protect you from this world that tried to crush her, and she was actually trying to give you a path that would be easier for you, and it, in her distorted brain, but it wasn't really going to be easier. But if you can go, oh, she was really doing the best that she could. It was not really good enough.
That is it.
Yeah. And then you can forgive yourself for not being perfect as well. So it's
it's interesting. Actually, my film is literally the journey. And I realized, my first thing is I had to understand my mother. Why did she treat me like this? I really grew up with a Cinderella complex because I'm the youngest of three. I have two older brothers, and they were being loved and adored. And, one would think, oh, she won the lottery. She finally got the girl. But it was like the complete opposite. And she goes into it. She touches on it. And actually, in the film, it's interspersed with a couple incredible therapists and therapy sessions. Right. And she went like the other way. So I had this moment of feeling I must be adopted because back in the day, unlike today, where, people want to have children, they can't have children. It's like, why am I being treated like this? So when I dug, it wasn't what you kind of gave as an example from what I understand about my grandmother, but she had so much hardship in her childhood. Oh, that's the other thing, secrets. She's of the generation you don't talk about things. So her father, due to circumstances, tried to kill himself twice, and she found him once. And they had huge financial hardships. Her sister died as an infant. It was one hardship after the next, and she was just this little girl. And she said, there's a moment in my film where I'm in France with her because one of my films was invited to France. My father had just died, and she goes, I'll come with you. And I'm like, you will? I'm like, oh my God, a filmmaker with her mother at a festival. And we were not resolved at that point. I was like, oh my God. And my whole family's thinking, they're not going to come home talking. But it was the beginning of the transformation of our relationship. So I shared with her, it was the most emotional she had gotten then when she said she used to have to spend her childhood in the waiting area at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn. It was, I guess, a mental health hospital or whatever. And back in that day, because my mother's 96 and a half, she was born in 1923. She's doing well, everybody. They didn't let children up to the hospital room. So here she is all by herself while her mother's, probably spending hours with, her husband, my mother's father. And he was never the same. He must have lost brain cells from using gas and stuff. And so she really didn't have a childhood, and she did well up. And as somebody says, if our parents never loved themselves properly, how are they going to love us? They never had a teacher to teach them. So how could they teach us? So like you said, and so the key thing here is I'm going to just say a light bulb moment was I was in LA, I lived in LA, and I met a woman who had a horrific childhood. And she was a French woman. And in her healing, she became a facilitator of a psychological board game. And well, I actually have a very bad memory that's been attributed. I've been in 2 studies, and now we attribute it to post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a serious memory issue. So all I remember from that day is it was literally a board game. You threw the dice landed. She said, stand up and close your eyes. I closed my eyes, and now she said, imagine your mother as a little girl. Now at that point, because every time I asked my mother, it's in the movie, anything about her past, I don't know.
I don't remember.
Right. I don't know. I don't remember. Right. I edited that together because she always said it. Right. And so that led to doing research, genealogy records, calculating ages and numbers, finding family that were her first cousins that I never met, and digging up what happened at this time period, finding newspaper articles. And long story short, I knew then at that time I was playing this game about the tragedies my mother had. So I saw a wounded little girl.
Yeah.
And then she said to me, imagine yourself as a little girl. I knew I was a wounded little girl. So now we were 2 little wounded girls. And she said, now you come together. That was unbelievable. She was no longer my mother. I even get chills when I think about it. She was no longer my mother. She was a wounded little girl like I was. So that label that we give people, you know, mother, father, spouse, sibling, and
They
all
keep
the
us stuck.
exactly all the expectations that go with it. So I now looked at her as a wounded little girl. And so when those insults came, you know, she's the queen of them with me, one after the next. Even though I never had a child, but I always imagine, like, you know, you guys who are parents here or grandparents, whatever, your little kid came to you and said, Mommy, Daddy, your toddler or whatever, little kid said, I don't love you anymore. What would you do? You would bend down and pick them up and give them love, because you know that's really what they need. So my mother said, you're going to amount to nothing. You're stupid. You're that, whatever. It's like I looked at her as a little kid who needed love.
Right.
That's
that's where she was stuck in a lot of ways. Your mom acts like a little kid.
She and I do. Still. And it's hysterical that I talk about my daughter, you know, my little kid. She's 96, and you know, she still loves the attention. You know, right. She just still. She has a tribe that her friends are obviously at this age. You outlive everybody who's are my age or a little bit older, and they follow her because she's entertaining. She creates this exciting life for people. She's outrageous. She's sharp
until you piss her off, and then she eviscerates you.
Very good, Michael.
and you know the sad thing here, guys. You know that expression we all know: the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Yeah. So you know, my mother has a sharp tongue, and guess what? I have it too. Yeah. You know, when I realized I was doing things I wasn't proud of, that I was now able to bring my mother to tears and be nasty. And I wasn't proud of it. And that's where the forgiving yourself comes in. Because when you suddenly turn and you start becoming a personality, a character you're not proud of, you have to forgive yourself for behaving ways you're not proud of.
Right.
There's a song by The Clash that says, you know, the fury of the hour, anger can be power. You know that you can use it. And, you know, as a young person, that always felt very powerful. And now it feels like a real big mistake. You know, anger can be power, but you know that it can really use you almost like a demon in a way. And it's really, it's hard to let go of that, because anger, it feels powerful, right? It's a way of lashing back if somebody has hurt you. And so it's really hard to kind of figure out how to let go of rage, because rage is a comfort at times. And yet rage does cause us all kinds of problems. You know?
Horrible stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm dealing with some personal things with people in my life now that I have to just sit back and go, Gayle, you need to like take your time. As I said, I always feel when an obstacle arises, whether it's with the person in your life, we need to take quiet time and go, there's a reason this happened. In fact, my brother, may he rest in peace, he hadn't seen the film as I was working on it. And Mike, you might appreciate this, because I certainly didn't want to show it to anybody in my family while I was working on it, because I knew I would be affected by their opinions. Mm-hmm. And he threatened, he said, I'm so sorry I signed the release. I don't want to have anything to do with this. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm almost done with this movie. I have all these Kickstarter followers. He's so important in this film. What am I going to do? And I actually relived my childhood illness for 24 hours. I was throwing up. I had headaches, and I hadn't had that since I was a child. And then I realized what happened. I had that light bulb moment. This happened to me now because I hadn't forgiven him yet. And I kept saying, oh, once the movie's out, I'll forgive him. And it's funny how life works. It happened to me now because I realized I have to forgive him now. This is it. So I'll never forget. I went over to his house. I was supposed to. I was afraid. I was a basket case making the movie. I was crying all the time. Every time I walked out, I wore sunglasses. I see a homeless person, they'd see me. We're hugging and I'm in tears. I felt as an empath, you know, feeling I think we're all empaths here, feeling everybody's pain. And I remember going to his house that was planned, but I brought a friend because I knew he wouldn't bully me in front of a friend. And he had his bar mitzvah picture blown up. That's 1959, guys. You know, it must have been from a party that his wife in many years, who had already passed, had there, and his current girlfriend that he later married. And I said, why is that there? And she says, I don't know. He wanted you to see. And I'm like, okay, what's the message? What's the message? We have our breakfast. And I'm like, I just want to get out, world affairs, not talk about the movie. Don't want him to voice my father's, you know, I have my father's war, 2 letters there. I'm thinking Erwin would voice it. And then he suddenly invites us downstairs, which is his finished bathroom. And guess what? His basement. And guess what he had? He was born in 1946. He had his baby book, and he was the firstborn. And and I'm hemming and hawing as you would, because as filmmakers and documentarians, we love this stuff, right? And I don't even have a baby book. And also my big brother's singing, I'm the prince, your next movie's going to be about me. That's all I needed. And I thought, I don't know what happened to him, but I know my brother, who in my eyes has had a big successful life, a law firm, children, grandchildren, he suffered in his life, and it's going back to childhood. I don't know what it is. I'm never going to know. And I apparently will never know. And that's all I needed, because that's what I needed to see him as a wounded child.
Right. Well, I want to say a little bit ago, you were stuck in the story that they were treated so well. Listen, as much as it seemed like they weren't, she wasn't nice to them either in their own way. She undercut them to control them in ways that you probably didn't see. And it felt like they were, So it's those things happen.
Michael, I'm so happy, since we're of opposite genders and coming from Jewish families. I want to share with you something. My middle brother, who I've always felt was the prize of my mother's love. And I also never had a relationship with him. Now it's growing, since I've lost my other brother, which is wonderful. Well, it's not wonderful I lost my brother, but it's wonderful I'm having a relationship with my surviving brother. But when he saw my film, he welled up, and he's not a welling up type, you know. And I didn't know what it was, and I hugged him, and then, you know, in a festival, it was a luncheon, I got pulled away, and that was the end of it. And cut to like a year later, we were together again because our brother was getting married. And I said, hey, Rob, you remember you saw my film and you know, I asked you what you thought and you welled up. Like, I'm thinking, you know, my mother's like, oh, see how talented, you know, my daughter is, how she put all the material together, the footage, the this, that. So I thought he was going to say that, you know, my talented sister. And it wasn't that. You know what it was? I almost died because I never saw him as insightful. And now it's like, oh, he's come years. He said, you never could do anything right, and I could never do anything wrong. And it's just what you said. Like, he was always on a pedestal.
We're seeing it, right. But that is also creates this insane pressure to always be perfect.
Yeah, it's like you said about your mother. Like, everything you did was great, right?
Well, it's more that I didn't believe it. It was because it didn't really, it wasn't, she didn't, you know, she wasn't actually present enough to really mean it. It was more like, oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
But, you know, as you were talking, there were 2 things that I really wanted to hit on, which is, you know, our movie is largely about Dr. Sarno. But one thing we did is we wanted to make the connection between many other doctors who do the same work, but from a completely different perspective. So there's a gastroenterologist, Dr. David Clark, who wrote a book called They Can't Find Anything Wrong. Because in his own experience as a gastroenterologist, he started getting all the patients that nobody could figure out. And he would just talk to them, and their story would come out, and he would connect it, and they'd get better. And he couldn't believe it at first, but it happened so often that he has like 7,000 cases like that. So again, this idea of story, but Gabor Mate is another doctor in the film, and he has a book called When the Body Says No. So if you don't have the ability to say no because you've been asked by a parent to to be a parent, essentially, when you're a child, to take care of their needs. So you can't say no, or you get in trouble, or it's just not safe to. You get all kinds of problems in your body. And so he ties it to all the autoimmune diseases. And then the third thing is that there is a book called The Presence Process by Michael Brown. And in that book, it's a 10-week meditation program, which I highly recommend everybody who's listening do. It's not easy. You have to read like 200 pages that are really dense and weird, but you have to read them because it's really speaking to your unconscious. But in this process, week number 3 is basically owning anger. So the first week, you're just kind of starting to discover things. You go a little deeper. The third week, every time you're angry, you're asked to do what you did, which is to go in the other room, essentially, and think about what it says about you, rather than the other person made you angry. Nobody makes you angry. You are angry. It is your responsibility. It doesn't mean that you have to allow them to do terrible things. But once you own responsibility for it, you can respond. So I like to call it responsibility, the ability to respond rather than react. So normally we react, we have a physical response, and then we respond, we react with rage, when in fact, because we're trying to be self-protective, something that doesn't seem safe, that's connected to our judgment of the way the world is supposed to be. So a lot of that stuff about really be with it, and it's about our judgment of what's expected. And if somebody crosses our line of expectation, they do something out of line, it can make us really angry. And or if they make us do something that we don't feel like we want to do, or feel something we don't want to feel, we can get really angry. But once we begin to process that, we stop actually reacting as much. We can still recognize this is out of line and learn to set boundaries. So perhaps there's someone who constantly pulls you into these negative things. You can set a boundary where you maybe don't see them as much, or find yourself being engaged and you just don't even engage. And what happens actually a lot of times, this is the most powerful thing about it, is if you stop reacting with anger, someone will be yelling at you or doing this thing to you. But if you don't energetically react, it just keeps blowing through until they get tired and they just stop. Because you're not in that relationship anymore. You refuse to be in the relationship that they're trying to force you into. And sometimes they'll keep poking and poking and poking because they need that reaction in order to feel like a release of something, or to feel that the relationship hasn't changed. And finally, they just give up and they accept it. And they're like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's so powerful what you're saying, because what we can do when that happens, as you said, instead of reacting, like they're picking the fight, they want to get you going. Yeah. And if you just let it go, ignore it, or let it blow off, and then come back with love. I mean, I've just done that with a couple of relationships where I was being attacked, and I just I just gave it space, and then I just wrote back with love. And I created some distance, which was necessary. So when you give love to somebody, they can't fight back to you, right? In fact, they can't start. You kind of like deflect.
Sometimes it can make them even angrier for a minute. But if you don't react to that anger, they either storm away, and then
you wait. Not in the midst
recognize that it's about them in this weird way.
Yeah, you back away for a while. No, and so as we all probably know, Viktor Frankl. I'm sure we all know Viktor Frankl. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was a psychiatrist, right? And was he a neurologist too?
And he wasn't. He was called. He created logo therapy.
Right. And his book, Man's Search for Meaning, to me is the most powerful book I've ever read about the Holocaust, because he really goes through what makes a person survive and what makes a person not. And it's certainly not the biggest and the strongest that we think. It's our state of mind. So people could take everything away from you. You know, in his case, the Nazis, the camps, you know, you're debilitated, you're hungry, you're physically barely surviving, but no one could, we have control over our thoughts. And when changing how we think, so that's the most important thing, you know, as they say, change your thoughts, you change your life. And so that is, and I always say, and I say it at the end of my TED Talk, and I say it all the time, as you said, everyone has a story. The 4 of us here have a story. All the people who are writing on the thread here, everybody has a story, right? And the key is for us to be the hero of our story, not the victim.
Right. Should we take a look and see if we can answer any of these questions?
Yeah, I'm going to check. So first of all, the first question was, first of all, it's so exciting. There's somebody from Italy. Could that be your friend, Michael? Somebody from Italy. I mean, his name is Sandro Bruschi from Italy.
I like a
So
brewski
nice.
as much as the next person. No, I don't think I know Sandro.
This is Sandro. So nice to meet you. And then I have met Fabian before from Luxembourg. Where is Luxembourg?
It's near Belgium, but
Belgium.
We used to fly there on the cheap Icelandic plane ticket in the 70s.
And then Sunit's visiting from New Jersey, who we had in our other show, and she's amazing. And my dear friend Rebecca from Israel. And there's even a question in Hebrew. I'm going to work on that one for a minute. But here's a question from
There's a woman, Peg,
who's a friend of
Dr. Sarno.
Dr. Sarno.
Yes?
No. Yes? Anyway. No, anyway, questions for Gayle.
Oh.
First of all, we know that your mom grew up with hypocritical parents, but what I'm curious,
my mother.
Here's the question. Here's the question. You can look at it and you can answer it, Gayle. Hold on. Yeah.
Okay. So did my mom grow up with hypocritical parents? For what I understand, no. How has your mom recognized the effects her behavior had on you? No. Has she ever apologized? I recommend watching the movie. She does a very good performance at the end. But here's the deal, Peg. Because at the end, I don't want to do any spoiler alerts. In the therapy session, the therapist says, "Can you turn to your daughter and say you're sorry?" But quite honestly, my mother, till today, and I've watched her do a lot of Q&As. And this is true. I love what she says. She says, when Gayle was born, we bought a carriage, and it came with a manual, right? How to put it together. But I did not come with a manual, and she did the best she could. And I have to tell everybody, she is my closest friend. No one could believe it. Since 2006, we have traveled the world together, and she was a big traveler that's after my father died. So it is a remarkable story of transformation. Yeah.
Amazing.
But I think a really good, a lot of times people ask a question like that because the idea is that once somebody says, "I'm sorry," it releases you in some way. But we don't actually need someone to say
exactly.
And in fact, if we're waiting for it, it's never going to happen. And it may never happen the way that we want it to. And even when it happens, it doesn't really happen like that.
And Michael, I'm so happy you brought that up because a lot of people have a deceased parent and they're still hanging on to that anger. So it's about us. It's not about anybody else. We do the work to release them. We do the work to forgive them, whether they're here or not. It doesn't matter, as you said, Michael, whether
it's a dual path, because if you can forgive them, you can forgive yourself. And once you can forgive yourself, you stop screwing up as much because you don't get caught in the traps of even the circular thinking or the overthinking. It's just, acceptance.
Right. Here's a question from Michael from Peg.
Yeah. So she says, do you have the symptoms cropping up? Yeah. One of the things that happens a lot in the Q&As for me is the first question is, are you healed? And, I think this whole idea of healing as a destination is very problematic. Healing is a process. It's a journey that never ceases. And if it does cease, you're not healed, because, it's just not possible to be healed of anything. I mean, we can be in remission from cancer or something, or we can get over a flu, but we always carry the process of being alive with us. And life is a constant stream of stuff. So particularly right now, actually, I've been doing a lot of yoga. I've been doing a lot of exercise, and I am sore as hell all over my body. My back is very sore every morning I get up. And just last night, I really resolved to do more journaling and more meditation and more being present, because it's really, it's interesting because I'm doing a lot of physical stuff to really be grounded, a lot of yoga. And yoga is a physical and emotional mental process. But I think I really need to do a little bit more of the focus on that right now. In order to really keep pushing through it.
Right. I'm looking at another question. So there's this woman who's talking about Evelyn Sperling. She said she watched the movie and she cried a lot, and so did a few other people. Okay, so she's just talking more about, here's what she's saying. I'll just show it to you. You can look at what she's sharing about the movie. Okay.
So should I read it aloud or everyone?
Yeah, please do. Please
Okay,
do.
so Evelyn writes, understanding my mother did the best she could with her internal resources and emotional intelligence, and not being emotionally attuned to herself by her own parents as a child was the way I was able to get to forgiveness. Great job, Evelyn. Yes.
Yeah.
Great job. That's right. It's us understanding and realizing they never learned, right? They didn't have the tools. So,
yeah.
And, you know, as I said in my, I don't know if I think she saw the film, I'm not sure. But my mother's first cousin in the movie said you wouldn't even tell it. She had no idea my mother had a sister that died, because you're not supposed to tell anybody. And if someone had cancer, you never shared it. So who came up with the expression, you're as sick as your secrets?
I think you just did. We're going to give you credit.
Okay, I'll say, oh, great. All right, yeah, put my name on that. Okay. It's a tweet. As Oprah goes, aha moment. But it's true. You know, when we keep things in, it festers, it becomes shame, and shame turns to kind of a illness or a cancer. And we need to let it out. And I tell people, I mean, I'm not saying do what Michael did and I did. We put our lives out there. But, you know, find the people to share with. And that's really important, that you find the right people. Because that's the other thing I've seen. And actually, this woman is a therapist. She, I remember she ran to a car to tell a friend about some medical report she had that wasn't positive. And she came back to me. She says, I was so upset. She was so dismissive of it. And then I thought, you know what? That was probably not the right friend to share this with. Like some of
or the right moment, you know.
Oh yeah, right.
Both.
The moment, the timing, and the person. But you know, we're each skilled in things. I'm the good friend to come with emotional stuff. But if you're moving, I'm not good at picking up boxes and schlepping. So we have to put our support system together, because we can't do this alone, and we always need a support system.
Yeah. So a friend of mine. A friend of mine from.
Just to address something.
Okay, go ahead, please do.
I think also sometimes the person you need to kind of be present with the shame with is mostly yourself, because you can't even really address it with anyone else until you've addressed it yourself. And sometimes we're actually hiding so much from ourselves. We kind of see it over here, but we're really keeping it over here. And so it's really just kind of being with it and letting go of that. Sometimes it's really important.
Good point. A friend of mine from Israel is asking that we update the viewers that are coming new on the panel, the title of the film and the topic of the film, for those that would just join. So maybe, Michael, can you mention the film again and where people can see it and view it? And maybe we'll put up a post. Can you just mention about the film?
Sure. Well, Gayle's film is Look at Us, Mother.
Yeah.
Look at us now.
About her, look at us now, Mother. And it's about transformation with a mother and a daughter and learning forgiveness. That's great.
Right.
And the film that we worked on, my partner's and I, is All the Rage. And it's about, mind-body healing, largely through Dr. Sarno, but it involves other doctors as well, and a couple of funny comedians.
Right. Right. And
they're both on Amazon, right? I mean, mine's on Amazon, yours is on Amazon, right?
Yeah, ours is just at alltheragedoc.com, as in DOC, documentary, or doctor, like what's up, doc.
Right. And mine is at lookatusnowmother.com. Oh, but my website, Gayle Kirschenbaum, has all my forgiveness work, and my upcoming workshop is there.
Great.
Michael, what I wanted to say also is what I love is that every time you had your movie in a different country, somebody added subtitles to it?
Well, someone would write to me from some country and say, I loved the movie. And so I would just ask them, can you the script of it is not that long. It's, 90 pages. But so I would just email to them, and if they would replace all of the text, that's how we have Hebrew subtitles. We have Spanish subtitles. We have Dutch subtitles. I just ask somebody else if they want to translate it. And if they do, then we're able to have another subtitles. So we have Dutch, Spanish. It's going to come out in Germany on Mind Jazz Pictures, and in France via Jupiter Films. which is why people aren't really actually able to watch those right now on Vimeo, because we had to, locate it that way. But any day now they should be available there.
I'm very excited.
Can I just add a little comment there? When we showed the film in Melbourne, a lady phoned me on her way home. She lived about 30 kilometres away. She said, I just told my husband how angry I was about what he'd said, or I can't remember what he'd done. And she said, my back pain went, just like that, just because I spoke out loud.
Wasn't ashamed to say what she felt.
Yeah, that's about keeping it in, right? That's keeping our.
And it doesn't even have to be. It doesn't have to make it that person's fault. It's just saying that really hurt me that you said that thing. It hurt me, right? And then if we can't even say that, it manifests physically.
Yeah,
it's really powerful.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I can say from watching my mother, who doesn't live with pain, she's remarkable at her age. And she
doesn't keep anything in.
She's actually the opposite. She keeps nothing in.
Right. Well, narcissism is an incredible medicine.
Great. Yeah. So I think that's all the questions for now. See if anything else comes in the next few minutes. Rose, you want to mention something about repressed feelings and?
Well, Gayle and Michael have taken all my, what would you call it, all my comments
tricks
away, because they've done them all. Yeah, like that lady that I was speaking about, she had never, ever spoken her truth.
Right.
And she did.
But it's also dangerous,
Sorry?
It can be dangerous to people. Like, that's why it's really hard.
But you become sick, Michael, right? Like,
but it's dangerous to do it. So you're protecting yourself.
Dangerous to do it. There's a fear. Well,
yes, because you'll get hurt.
I had
fear is relevant.
So I had a friend, I'm going to generalize, here about cultures. Like in the Jewish culture, when I grew up, particularly having the mother I had, it was like, everything's out there. You don't even think before you speak. My mother see someone and go, oh, she saw a boyfriend.
You got so fat.
Exactly. I had a boyfriend in my early 20s. He was tall, dark, and handsome, met him on the ship, and his father was a captain from Holland. And it was decades since I saw him. Actually, he came to a screening in Atlanta where he lived. And my mother's first words were, Edwin, you got so fat. So anyway, it is, so important not to keep things in. And I have a girlfriend who was raised in a very different culture, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture, where she was raised where children are to be seen and not heard.
Right.
And she was never encouraged to speak up. And it manifests itself in her throat. She always had these throat issues, which were so symbolic. And until she finally released it. So, I feel like there's such a connection of the things. Like when the thing happened in my hands, I was thinking, that's interesting. First of all, you're holding on to things. So it was my hands. I had to release it. And to the skin, I had to shed all of this away, all this pain. It was shedding away that layer. So, I'm sure if we all think what's bugging us today or not. I mean, I just want to share that I went to I had 2 bunion surgeries a few years ago, and then the doctors saw something from an MRI on my ankle. He sends me to a old-time celebrity orthopedic guy, because you walk into his office and it's like a Hollywood producer, because it's him and a famous athlete, pictures one after the next. And he immediately tells me I have this condition in my ankle, which is called OCD. And he immediately tells me I need to have this surgery and I shouldn't wait. And you have to go to the hospital for special surgery. And you have to go to this doctor, and tells me how long the recovery is going to be, which is worse than bunion surgery. And thank God my insurance wasn't taken there. But I also thought, I don't think I can go through this now. And guess what? I've never had pain. He swore I was going to start having all this pain and arthritis, and I don't want to, as we say in Yiddish, give myself a kind of hurry here by bringing this up, and I'll knock on some wood. But it's like I could have just bought into that and suddenly started having ankle pain.
Right. So there's emotional stories we tell ourselves, and then we buy into the physical stories as well.
Right.
We get afraid that something's going to happen, and I mean, I can't tell you how many people I know who, got the coronavirus symptoms. In fact, there was an article in The Guardian. It's like all the symptoms of the coronavirus are the same as anxiety because they're basically it's inflammation.
No.
Yeah,
Oh,
all of them.
wow.
Yeah, they're all related. It's breathing. It's just all these things, headaches, everything. You look at it, it's so people were getting anxious about getting it, and they're going to get the test. And they didn't have it, and then they go get the test, and that would give it to them.
No, but you're absolutely right. We created ourselves. We completely can get ourselves sick.
Yeah, and we can get ourselves unsick. I mean,
that's
Dr. Schubner's book is Unlearn Your Pain.
Unlearn Your Pain.
Because it's really a learned process. Yeah.
So where did I hear? Was it in your movie? Was it in the book? There is, I'm probably screwing it up a bit. There is no pain without your brain.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the doctors mentions that. I mean, like the whole definition of pain is a physical or emotional response to tissue damage or the threat of tissue damage.
Right.
So really, pain is there as a signal from our brain to get us to do something to get out of danger. Now, the problem is that our brain has different parts. So we have the amygdala, which is in the middle of your brain, and that's the fight or flight response. Fight or flight, right? So if we learn to be in fight or flight, we're flooded with stress hormones. But if the amygdala checks in with the cortex and says, hey, say like you almost get hit by a bus, walking off the curb because you're not paying attention, your amygdala checks in with the cortex, our bus is dangerous. No, buses aren't dangerous. Walking around like an asshole without looking where you're going, that's dangerous. Pay attention. So then you pay attention. But if it goes, yeah, buses are dangerous. Now, every time you see a bus, you're not really conscious of it, but your amygdala says bus danger, cortex, boom. You get the cortisol rushing through your body. Same thing every test in college. The first time you're aware, like, oh my God, I got the hot sweats, I have this big test. Next time, you're not even thinking, but your body is responding to emotional threats as if they are physical threats. And if you're doing that constantly, hello, autoimmune disease.
Right.
Because really you're just flooded with stress hormones. Hello, fibromyalgia. It's just the body attacks itself. And that's actually a big part of COVID, which is that all of the symptomology and all the things that cause the damage, that's not been caused by the virus itself. It's caused by the body's response to this threat. And so if your body is hyper contextualized to search for threats and then react, and that's not saying that, dying of COVID is anyone's fault, but if we know about this, we can respond to it and do everything we can to calm our central nervous system, to improve our immune ability to respond. And I'm going to just make one more small story about this. We had a miscarriage when my wife was 3 months pregnant. We had a 3-year-old. And we had a series of interns at the time, and one of them got a brown recluse bite, she was told. I got one at the same time, so I thought it was a brown recluse. I looked it up. There's nothing you can do. Antibiotics don't really help. It actually turned out it was a MRSA infection that she had. Later, I thought, oh, maybe I got the MRSA infection when we went to the hospital because it was community acquired or hospital acquired infections. And then I realized, oh, it was grief. I was having grief because of this loss, but it took me many years, like 5 years later, I realized that was all grief because we all have MRSA on our body most of the time. This is true. Like MRSA is everywhere. It's when does it infect you? It's when your immune system is down, and then it can go crazy. So if your immune system is compromised in any way, and grief is a humongous immune system compromiser. And so once I realized that, I'm much more able to respond to it in a better way.
So I would say probably grief and fear. Fear is a huge. And aren't we born with whatever the beginnings of cancer are? Like, isn't this all kind of in our bodies? It's just we create the environment to let this stuff grow. Right. And it's all up here. So, yeah, it's really interesting.
But the dangerous thing about this, people hear that and they think that, oh, so you're saying I'm responsible for my pain or I'm responsible? Yeah. No, you're not responsible, but everyone's responsible. We know this. Like, there's a book out now by a guy named Wayne Jonas called How Healing Works. And it's about how he like runs studies for the VA and all these different places, like, just really looks at big groupings of studies to tease out what the data tells us. And after many, many years of doing this, he realized that 80% of healing comes from within. Only a very small 20% is the healing agent. And that can be as simple as a touch from a doctor. It could be a suggestion that you're going to get better, or it could be a really powerful antiviral drug. But that's only going to go to 20%. If your body is not doing the work that it needs to do, and your brain is not telling your body to do the work, and your brain is not giving it agency, it's not going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
Belief is incredible.
No, it's very, I think I'm here in New York City, which is our epicenter in America. And so I find it fascinating what you're saying about COVID. And I've had so many people like so worried. I mean, I go out all the time. I take the precautions. I cover myself. I wear the gloves. I use my bike. But I never once had feel any fear that I'm going to get it. It doesn't weigh over me. But you're right. Everything is our brain. Our brain controls it all. And you know what? The good news is, everybody, we have control over our thoughts. Right. We should not let our thoughts have control over us. So if we work on our thoughts, we can heal ourselves.
Yeah, and I would say one more further step from that. As we get to in the film, it's really not Descartes, but the king who wanted to kill Descartes, which caused this whole problem by saying, you can have the mind, I'll take the body, because the king wanted control of the minds, right? Right. So he had to separate them out. They're not separate systems. It's one system. Right. It's a mind body. It's linguistics that are the problem. Right. There's no separateness.
Well, right. And so we can just look aside from linguistics. Isn't it so exciting for us to know that we can heal ourselves? Like, absolutely. We don't need to go anywhere other than inside. Right. That's it. We just need to be with ourselves, find, systems to work on ourselves, and we can heal ourselves. I find that so empowering.
But then the truth is, what that does is it actually makes medicine work much better. So the whole point is, we're not saying medicine isn't helpful and doctors aren't helpful, but instead we have to be partners with them, and they actually have to be partners with us. They have to respect us as patients. They have to listen to us. I mean, really, the very first question that any doctor should ask you, they should put their hand on you and say, so what's going on in your life? And usually someone will just start crying, and then they'll, I'm feeling much better, thank you very much. Because so much of the time, the reason we're ill is we're holding something in. And like literally, if they just can look you in the eye and ask you what's going on in your life.
But they're not trained. But Western medicine is not trained like that.
We need to retrain we need to retrain capitalism. We need to retrain the medicine.
I mean, when the doctor at Beth Israel Hospital was lasering my hands, it was 20 sessions. I'm 10 into it. He actually misses the finger. And I go, this isn't helping. In fact, I think it's getting worse. When do we call it quits? He goes, okay, we can call it quits. And then we talked, and he says, well, look, he said it. Western medicine does not go to the source. We treat the symptoms, and that's the problem.
Right, and that's why, like, say, the cortisone will push down the symptoms
temporarily.
But that's really bad, because you allow the problem to get even deeper.
And mask it. It masks. That's the problem. Like these it's so interesting you talked about cortisone shots, because my brother, the one who unfortunately is not here, who had debilitating back pain, he would always be going for those cortisone shots. And, there's like a window of time they last, but they always said that masks the source of the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Listen to the pain. Don't try and run from it. Because it's always there for a reason.
Right. It's your wake-up call. It's time to go inside and release that emotional pain that you've been hanging on to. And you'll get
find that tumor.
You'll find that tumor that I believe we can create in our right.
I'm in agreement with you. Yes, yeah, absolutely.
True. Terrific.
Actually, I had an incident. I don't know if we have time. Do we have time? Tell you a little medical thing? Yeah. Okay. So I was 32 years old. I wasn't very happy with what I was doing in my life. I think I was in the TV commercial business, and though it was very lucrative, I was like, this was like not for me. I had a company, and I remember we awarded the Red Man chewing tobacco commercial. It was a lot of money, and 60 Minutes did a special on lip and tongue cancer in children, and I said, I can't do this commercial. Anyway, I was with my then sister-in-law, and she was taking diet pills, and my other brother's a doctor, and she got them from my other brother, and I said, oh, give me some. So I started taking some of these pills, and it's an amphetamine, right? And so I'm super sensitive. I'm the person who could take the Benadryl and sleep for 3 days. So I'm taking this amphetamine, and I feel like this tingling around my brain and this weird thing in my tongue, and it turns white. Anyway, I go to my gynecologist. It's just a routine checkup, and he feels something. And he goes, all right, maybe it's premenstrual. Come back after your period. I come back after my period. He goes, I'm sending you for a sonogram. And what he discovers is this, there's like a tumor on my ovary. And I'm like, oh my God, where did that come from? And so now I start going to, he wasn't a surgeon, start thinking, how am I going to handle this? I go to a healer and he says to me, drugs. Any drugs? Did you take chemicals? He goes, chemicals. And then chemicals, drugs. And I went, well, I'm so happy you said that. I said, I took these diet pills. And so what he said to me is, by taking those, I prevented my brain from doing what the brain does, to all the messages it sends to our body to heal it. It stopped these, it interrupted that and created the environment. What was growing in me, which I guess people are born with, is called a dermoid cyst. And by the time this thing was discovered, I created the environment to let it grow. It was the size of a grapefruit. And I could have worked with him, but at that point I had a lot of anxiety. I wanted to get out of advertising. I was going to move to California. So I researched and I did have the surgery. I had it removed, but I say that I did it. I say it was my ulcer, because right. I wouldn't have taken those diet pills if I knew it was self-sabotaging. Right. And so I think that we do things that to feed us at that moment, but in a way they're self-sabotaging, but we can heal ourselves.
It's very true. I'm going to answer this question, then I wanted to get Rose and Michael's opinion. Lorraine asked, thoughts on rare conditions. Now, I don't think anything is, in other words, let me say the whole question. A year ago, she developed trigeminal neuralgia, which I know as a chiropractor is the cranial nerves get encroached upon and you get facial symptoms. It can be very painful because there's a lot of sensitivity there. She's trying the TMS approach, but some days it's hard to stick because the pain is excruciating. So number one, I think everything can, in other words, when a condition happens, if it's chronic, it's not normal. It's not normal for the body not to be able to heal. That's the point. And when something's chronic and very painful, it's so hard to believe that it's emotional when the pain is real. So we always talk about the phantom leg and things like that. But all I can say is, Lorraine, in a few seconds is, even if you have a physical diagnosis, your reaction and your response is where you can heal quickly and take responsibility. And I know you're on the right path with TMS. And sometimes when the pain is more excruciating, it's the message telling you I'm protecting. So my advice is to stick with the program. And I think Rose, I'd like to share this with Rose because I think she'd say something very, very profound about it. So listen. Rose? See the question?
I just said Gayle's comment about holding back will cause those problems and those symptoms. So what are you holding back? It's not about your pain. It's what you're holding in, in your own thoughts, or refusing, I suppose, to acknowledge the thoughts that are going through your mind. And they're okay because they're just in you. They're not. No one else needs to even know about them.
Right.
Which is why journaling can really help. Sometimes just writing. Sometimes you write things, you're like, what did I just write? Because you and it's important. I think actually it's interesting. It's much better to write with a pen and a paper than it is to type, because there's more of a flow to it, I think. And there's actually a lot of data about that writing is really important.
Yes.
But also, we just want to acknowledge for everybody that it's really difficult at times. I mean, the pain is there because your brain is trying to protect you from unthinkable thoughts. So it's not like, oh, I'm just going to turn to it now, I'll see it. It can be really difficult, and it can be a long process. So you want to go gently. You want to just recognize when the pain is really bad, that it's there for a reason. And sometimes, so in my case, what happens in the movie is we were releasing a movie, and I just pushed myself way beyond anybody's capacity. I couldn't walk, and I did a Q&A at every screening over the entire weekend. I mean, I literally could barely make it into the theater to do it, but I was going to just push through this thing. And then I got crushed because I had pushed myself way beyond my capacity because I wasn't listening to my own self as well. I was pushing, even though there was no point in pushing, because I wasn't going to force people to accept these ideas. I wasn't going to get past everybody's resistance to what we were talking about. And I had to learn to accept that. And that is still an ongoing process, learning to accept those things that we can't change. I mean, these religious homilies that we hear all the time, they're really profound. And that doesn't, you don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in the scripture. But if you don't believe in, give me the strength to, accept the things I can't change and to change the things that I can. Well, that's not even religious. It's just factual. I mean,
It is.
And that's kind of the same thing you're talking about. This pain is trying to get you to not think of something. So if you can just turn and see what that thing is, it's scary, but it's not as scary as being in the pain that you're in. And that's where the gift of the pain is. It helps you to move past it.
Right.
What about, Michael, I'm curious with the whole concept of focusing on what we have in life, not what we don't have. I find that we too often, I remember watching the Paralympics. Thank you. And there was a woman who had no legs. She was born that way. And she was adopted from Russia. And they interviewed the mother and they said, how did you make, this Olympic winner? And she said, I raised her to think of what she has in life, not what she doesn't. Right. And to come from gratitude, because when we focus on all the pain, we're just making it worse. If we just focus on if we put our thoughts in positive places and think about all the things we do have.
And this is the tightrope, right? Because what we're talking about is, so oftentimes when people hear that, they think, okay, how am I going to ignore or essentially repress the thing that's bad? So we focus on the thing that's good. So I think that there's incredible power in thinking positively and being grateful. But the really important thing to do is to remain in balance where we also are in acceptance of those things that we can't control. And that we recognize that sometimes the pain is resistance to thinking or feeling something we don't want to feel. So how can you be grateful for the pain for revealing that hidden thing you don't want to see so that you can be grateful that you've gotten rid of it? So it's really it really is just, trying to walk on that line.
No, the most important thing is recognizing the source of the pain and getting rid of it.
Right.
But also being grateful. So, I think I'm really
being grateful,
happy that you said it, because sometimes people can hear the other part and go, oh, I've got to really focus on the pain. But it's not that. It's about being in balance.
And you're talking about the journaling. One thing that I do every day religiously is I journal with a pen. And then at the end of my journal, I come up with 3 people I'm going to show gratitude that day. And it could just be a little text of love. Yeah. And every day, 3 people get something from me.
Very good.
Right, and even that becomes a practice. So even if you miss a day, you've changed the way that your brain works. Rather than thinking, here's one person I'm going to send a fucking hate mail to today. Okay, I remember you, Bobby Gillespie. You did that terrible thing in 4th grade. Snapped my bra. So it's not.
So anyway, Yeli Khan, which I think you're from Israel because the name. She watched the movie. She watched the Sarno movie a few days ago. Thank you, Michael, for allowing the Cinema Film Festival for making it free. Mm-hmm. It feels, and her pain has been less. Her pain went down.
Great.
It feels like understanding that maybe it's emotional pain, but that it wasn't her fault. So that's a biggie, that people feel blame. Right. Like part of what I find is when patients are in pain and they can't deal with the fact that they can't get rid of it. It's like their ego, and that
it is their ego.
There's
their ego's trying to be in control.
But there's this blame of what did I do wrong? And so I think what you're saying, Ellie, is that you are. Help me to explain this. I'm not really sure what she's saying. Can you say it?
Yeah, exactly. It's not only is it not your fault, it's not your parents' fault, it's not anybody's fault. It just is. And that's where, Rose and I like to talk a lot about radical acceptance. When you just accept where things are, so for instance, it's not resist the pain, is that you accept it. Just as if you accept somebody's rage being aimed at you and you don't react to it, you respond to it by just Okay, so that's that anger that you're having, that's about you. It's not about me. You don't take it into your body. You don't react to it. It's the same. It's all the same. I mean, it's just really being in balance. And it's not even that person's fault, right? If you want to ascribe fault to them, it's not so much as that. It's sometimes you want them to kind of recognize it so you can get out of the pattern with that person. But it's a pattern they learned. And if you want to blame them, it doesn't help you either. So forgiveness is incredibly powerful. Gratefulness is very powerful. Yeah. So it's all connected.
Yeah. Well, the blaming is terrible. It's so easy for us to go to blame people for all the things that aren't good in our life, including the pain or whatever. But that's essentially giving our power away. That's making someone else responsible for our own life.
Yeah.
So blaming is very unhealthy.
Well, we're blaming because we don't want to be responsible, because we are afraid of being responsible, because with responsibility comes the demand for action. And we don't want to be responsible because when we were kids, if you're responsible for not cleaning the table, you're the one that gets hit in the head. It's like you want to avoid being responsible as a self-protective mechanism. And so when we realize, okay, I can't be responsible, forgiveness also involves being like, I am so sorry I hurt your feelings. I didn't realize I was doing that. I recognize, I see that caused you pain. I didn't mean that. But forgiving yourself at the same time. So then you're like, not like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. It's like, oh, I'm really sorry I did it. But then also not taking it into your body and feeling responsible for it. You don't have to be responsible. You've just owned it. Like once you've owned it, you're done.
Great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Rose?
Do you think we should wind up?
Yeah.
Thank you both. It's just
amazing.
Very entertaining as well as informative. And
so who's going to edit
the dialogue between each other. Very entertaining. And both the films, Gayle's is dark, but it's just so laced with humor. I think every mother and daughter should watch it. I haven't had a chance to get my daughters to watch it, but I send them a message to watch it. But of course, we can't get together. And because Mother's Day is
you can have
coming
a
up.
virtual party. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Mother's Day is coming up. And all that unspoken angst that happens in families could actually be exposed and released with Gayle's movie. You don't have to have a intrusive mother like that to know where your pain is in your own family. And if that's art gives us, and film especially, gives us a chance to look at our own suffering and pain through the eyes of someone else, and then we can reflect back on ourselves. And both those movies, they're so profound. So
Excellent.
Rose,
thank you
can I
both.
share something? I just want to share that the workshop on Saturday will come with the link, so you'll immediately get the link to see the film prior to the workshop, along with a few other very powerful videos on this topic.
So if we wind up with just reminding ourselves that our bodies need to feel peace, need to feel the calmness that we actually deserve, and not the tension and the fight and flight that started in our childhoods. So if we just take a few moments to notice what's happening in our bodies, and again, spend a few moments breathing. When I was reflecting on this, I was reminded that most of us have got these Apple Watches that remind us to breathe. And how often do we look at it and do it when Apple Watch reminds us to breathe? So right now, do a body scan. Everyone who's watching, and do a body scan and see where the tension is in your body. And if you notice it, release it. Close your eyes for a few moments. Take a breath in quietly, deeply. Allow your chest to expand, rise, should I say, and your abdomen to expand. Hold your breath for a moment and release it. Please do this from time to time, and especially when you have a notion of being what they call triggered. And if you change that word to having buttons that are pressed, and you realize trigger the word would push a response, an aggressive response or a defensive response. But a button, if someone presses your buttons, it's opening up the pain in your heart. You see when you undo the button and there's a painful heart in there or hurting heart in there, and you turn around and you give that heart the love it needs, you won't need a trigger, because you'll have a button that opens up your inner self and allows you the space to heal. You know, from a nursing perspective, when we have a deep wound, we don't expect the wound to heal from the top, because if it heals from the top, the infection remains within the wound. But we cleanse the wound and we expect the healing to come from internally, from within the body, and then it granulates and it again eventually heals over. But if it heals from the top and we shut down our feelings and our emotions, it will fester. Thank you both for a wonderful, wonderful morning in Melbourne, afternoon in America, evening in Israel and Europe. All the very best, and all the best for your program, Gayle.
Thank you.
And we will respond to any questions or remarks. I have tried to do so during the session anyway, but we'll respond on Facebook. And please join us next week.
Yeah.
For our next wonderful guest. I've got some really good guests coming up.
Oh, in June we got a lot of great guests.
All different areas of grief and pain. So good night, good morning, good afternoon.
Lala Tov, be well.
Thank you.
Here we go. Stop.